Saturday, I assaulted you.
No one could predict what would happen when victims confronted their torturers.
Do you remember saying to me that you are able to treat me like an animal or like a human being? And that how you treated me depended on whether I cooperated or not?
I can't remember it correctly, sir, but I would concede I may have said it.
Is it not true that you and Khosin assaulted me throughout the trip?
If you say we assaulted you in the Kombi, then I would concede that in all probability I did.
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the transparent solution. After the period of apartheid in South Africa from 1995 to 2002, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission forged a frontier by leading the victims and perpetrators of apartheid to try to reconcile the past and move forward through the use of public testimonies. How did we get from here to here? The racial segregation of South Africa started this all. What was apartheid? Otherwise known as apartheid in the Dutch Afrikaans language, apartheid was a system of segregation against non-white citizens in South Africa. In 1948, the reunified Afrikaner Nationalist Party took over, even after losing their election by around 120,000 votes. For a long period of time before the election in 1984, the reunified National Party advocated topics such as white supremacy and apartheid. The South African Parliament approved the Natives Land Act of 1913. This was one of the nation's earliest segregation laws. Following that, the Population Registration Act made sure that every South African citizen's race was documented in the public domain. After the Group Heirs Act of 1950 opposed physical segregation between the races, the government added a separate Representation of Voters Act of 1951 that abolished the right to vote for the people of color. The Bantu Education Act divided whites and blacks in schools. This policy was intended to keep blacks from acquiring employment that would allow them to advance in their careers. In conclusion, the Nationalist Party created so many acts that it prevented the non-white minorities to have a successful future in the paradigm set to them. Were you in contact with any affected of apartheid, and do you have any stories to tell?
Well, yes. We were all in contact with people who are affected by apartheid. I mean, both the white and the black people were affected by it, and obviously the black people were largely disadvantaged by it. It was actually a normal part of life to see that the beach would be filled with white people and black people were not allowed to go to the beach in that area, and they'd have their area. The same with buses and public toilets. They were all separate, so we were constantly being confronted by this.
The resistance to these acts were non-violent protests. Then, in 1952, Nelson Mandela and other anti-apartheid leaders were leaders in the Defiance Campaign. The campaign's goal was to break so many unjust segregation laws that the prisons would overflow and that the apartheid system would fall apart. At the end of the campaign, 8,000 black people were arrested. The protest did not work. No, this protest was one of the events that made the United Nations note of apartheid as a threat to peace. On March 21, 1960, a group of protesters were protesting against the oppressive past laws. The police opened fire, killing 69 people and injuring over 180 people. This event was a turning point in apartheid since it was one of the first times the UN looked into the segregation. After the killing of non-violent black protesters in Sharpeville in 1960, Mandela assisted in the acts of sabotage against the white minority government. In 1961, Mandela was convicted and cleared of treason after assisting in the acts of sabotage against the white minority government. But in 1962, he was imprisoned again for unlawfully leaving the country. Mandela admitted to allegations against him, including sabotage and treason. Mandela was sentenced to life in jail on June 12, 1964. Mandela was receiving so much support around the world. This is what his wife, Winnie Mandela, has to say.
Will there be one man, one vote?
Certainly. That is inevitable. There will be a one man, one vote in this country, and there will be a majority government in this country. But that majority government will accommodate everybody.
Led by
Mandela.
On February 11, 1990, Frederick Wilhelm de Klerk released Nelson Mandela from prison. Mandela's release was important because it was a symbol of the end of apartheid coming. Apartheid ended through multi-party negotiations between 1990 and 1993. On May 10, 1994, Mandela became president. This was a real turning point because this was the first election that every race could vote. He established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He did this to investigate the gross human rights violations under apartheid and introduced numerous initiatives designed to improve the living standards of South Africa's black population. So what was the TRC? During a Truth Commission gathering, there are 17 commissioners, 9 males and 8 females, also including the victim, the prosecutor, or both, and they have time to recount their traumatic experiences while the commissioners and the world is watching. Here in this clip, Archbishop Desmond Tutu has an amazing way to show why we need the TRC.
We are a wounded people because of the conflict of the past, no matter on which side we stood. We all stand in need of healing. We on the Commission are no superhuman exceptions. We too need forgiving. We too need to forgive.
Then I went into the police station.
During a TRC public speaking, this is a video of a man describing the torture he felt during
And a
apartheid.
policeman called Petrus wanted to take my fingerprints. And he put my head into the toilet seat. When I pulled my head out, trying to look around, one other white guy who was a sergeant told me to look at the back. And he hit me with a gun on my face. And blood came running out of my mouth. And I said to him, because I was afraid of him, I prayed to him and I said, please look at me, blood is coming out of my mouth.
That was an incredibly important and very successful process whereby the possibility for white and black people to communicate in a non-confrontational way about really, really difficult topics. And on the one hand, I think it was very important for the black people to have their grievances being recognized publicly and officially. And on the other side of the coin, it was also the opportunity for white people who were the perpetrators of these heinous crimes to apologize.
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was a frontier in South Africa and was used in 2008 to help the Indigenous people of Canada. On June 1, 2008, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada was formally established to record the history and ongoing effects of the Canadian Indian residential school system. The Commission provided survivors of residential schools with the opportunity to speak about their experiences during sessions held both in public and private venues. The purpose of the Canadian Truth Commission was to give those who had been directly or indirectly touched by the legacy of the Indian residential school system an opportunity to share their stories and experiences, as well as educate all Canadians around the world about the horrific events that took place in the residential schools. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission demonstrates that we should keep communicating to grow stronger together.